Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm here with another design team project for Scrapping for Less. Today I am using a stamp set by LaLa Land Crafts called At the Beach. I'm stamping with Lawn Fawn's Jet Black ink on a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Now I'll be creating a scene here, and I know that she's in a seated position, so I did contemplate on what I was going to have her sit on. I ultimately decided to have her sit on the edge of a pool. So I went ahead and masked her out, and I am not an artist by any means. So when I create a scene, I typically like to stick with straight lines if at all possible. So I had a little guide there that I had just kind of scribbled up just to make sure that it was going to work. And I'll be taking my ruler and a Copic Safe pen. In this case, I'm using a pen by Cricut, and just creating 2 straight lines to create that edge of the pool that she'll be sitting on. Next, I took some Post-it note tape and masked out the bottom and the top of the card panel, and I'll be using Hickory Smoke Distress ink to go ahead and add color to that concrete area or edge of the pool that she is sitting on. Once that was all blended out, I moved that tape down and I masked off the bottom part to create that grassy area that is behind her. I started by covering the entire area with the lightest color, which is the Twisted Citron, and I added the mowed lawn just along where the tape is, and then blended that out again with the lightest color. I moved that Post-it note tape down a little bit to about 1/4 of an inch or so below that bottom line that I had drawn, and I'll be using Salty Ocean Distress ink for the water. And once all my coloring and ink blending is done, I'll go ahead and add a little dimension or a little interest to that water to make it actually look like it's water and not just a blue patch of the card. Once I removed that Post-it note tape, I added a few lines with my ruler to that concrete area just to make it look a little bit more like concrete. When you remove your masks, especially over distress ink that may be still wet, you just want to be careful that you don't not necessarily just tear the mask, but you can tear the paper as well. So you just want to be very careful when you're removing your masks. For the Copic coloring, I started off by coloring this little area above the water and below the edge of the pool. I guess this would be where like the pool lining is. And I'm using my W markers here. Typically when I use my W or my C markers, I can start off with my darkest color. They seem to blend pretty well without, laying down your lightest color first. So I created my shadow just under the edge of the pool. I guess that would hang over the pool a little bit and behind her legs. My light source for this card will be in the top right hand corner, so all of my shadows will be off to the left. I blended that out with my W1 and then my W3, and then I'll go back in with my W1 and blend that entire area out. For her skin, I'll start off with my lightest color, which is my E50, and map out where my darkest areas will be, which will be off to the left on her face, as well as underneath where her hair hangs over her face, on the inside of her arms, underneath her chin, and on the sides of her legs. I'll then go in with my darkest color, which is my E04. This has a little bit of a reddish tint to it. So when I go in with my next color, which will be an E11, I'll go over the E04 and blend it out a little bit. I'll go directly over it just to kind of tone down that reddish tint. When I was coloring the skin, I did not realize that I was leaving her belly out. So once I get to her bathing suit, coloring her bathing suit, I then realized that I missed that part. So I'll go back in there later and fix that. I also added a little bit of shading above her bathing suit top. Her chest and her neck area, I really wasn't getting any kind of contrast there. So once I go in with my lightest color, I do end up just adding a little bit of shadow there. Once her skin was all colored, I went in with my R20 marker and added a little bit of color to her cheeks. And later on, I do go over her lips with that same color as well. Now for her hair, I wanted to make her look kind of like a dirty blonde. So whenever I do hair, I start off with my darkest color just because I don't want it to blend too much. I want those highlights to stay where they are. So I start with my E15 marker, which is a brown marker. And I just lay out my darkest areas, making sure that I leave a highlight, especially on the right-hand side. I lay down shadows underneath her little sunglasses, and she does have a ponytail there too. So that part will have a different highlight than the rest of her hair that is hanging down. Next, I went on to my YR24 and I extended those flicks a little bit, but I also went directly over the E15 because it's a brown. I wanted to kind of tone that down and lighten it up with a yellowish tint. So I went directly over that, and I'll do the same thing with my next two colors as well. For her bathing suit, I'll be coloring that orange. And my lightest color is actually going to be a Y marker. Typically when I do color any object orange, my highlight is almost always a Y marker. So I started off by laying out my darkest areas, which will be off to the left as well as underneath the little layers within her bathing suit. I also extended those little lines that are within those layers just to give it a little bit more contrast. Once my lightest color was down, I moved on to my darkest color, then my two midtones, and then back to my Y marker. I will end up coloring her sunglasses and her little sandals the same color as well. But this is where I realized that I missed her belly for those skin tones. So I'll go back in with those same four colors that I used for her skin and color her belly. For her belly, the shadows will be off to the left as well as underneath the top of her bathing suit. So again, I just go in with my lightest color, then to my darkest, then to midtones, and then back out to my lightest again. For her sunglasses, I initially was going to use all four of those same markers, but I ended up not going back over with my lightest just because it was going to blend in with her hair a little too much. So I just used the 3 YR markers, but I will use that lightest one on the sandals. The shading for her sunglasses will be on either side of those frames. And for her sandals, it will be towards the back of her shoe. And the highlight will be towards the front of the shoe. The sunglasses are a little bit round and they're on top of her head, so it would be more of a rounded object. For her little drink that she has in her hand, I'm using some RV markers. I just drew a line on top of that cup to show where that drink is in the cup. The shading will be off to the left, especially underneath her hand. That would create a shadow. And I left just a little bit of a highlight towards the right hand side where the sun would be shining on that glass. For the lenses of her sunglasses, I am using my C markers as well as my black marker. And I was going to do the same thing here as far as leaving a highlight towards the right, but I ended up getting a little too heavy-handed with my darker C markers. So I'll go back in later and add just a little bit of a highlight or reflection with my white gel pen. I used one of those RV markers for her ponytail holder, and I'm not sure if that's her ear or an earring, so I colored it with the RV marker, and we're just going to call it an earring. I used my C5 and my C3 marker to add just a little bit of a shadow on that concrete area where she's sitting off to the left-hand side. Blended that out with my C3 marker. I didn't go any lighter than that because it would have just blended in with the Distress ink. I added a little bit of blue to her eyes, and I took a YG marker and added a few blades of grass to the background just so that you could tell that it was grass. For the water, I took a little bit of an inexpensive acrylic paint, watered that down a little bit, and took a flat paintbrush and just added a few little ripples within that water. After I got done recording, I did add a little bit of shading to the grassy area right behind where the edge of the pool would have been. Next, I added a sentiment from a Lawn Fawn set that came with one of the Flavor of the Month kits a long time ago, and I'm using VersaFine ink to stamp that right on my panel. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a great day.